Hey everybody, here we are in exercise 136 on page 216 of Shelmerdine's text, and in this example I'm going to go through numbers 1 through 5, which is more than I normally do because I think it's going to be worth spending some time breaking these words down and being able to analyze these forms. And remember that we're in chapter 31 dealing with the perfect and the pluperfect systems, and that it's useful to think of this relationship between the perfect and the pluperfect as akin to the relationship between the present and the imperfect. This one is secondary in terms of its sequence. Perfect is going to be primary. So the secondary also means in the indicative we're going to get a past indicative augment, a PIA. And then we're going to see secondary verb tense endings versus primary verb endings in the perfect. All right, so with that as a preamble, let's get to some of these examples. So whenever we're looking at a word that we suspect is perfect, and this is also true for a lot of the Greek verbs, we're going to find the core of the word and its word meaning at the very center. So in this case, pow, which we know is coming from the verb powo, to stop. So these things are hard to pull apart. They're not always going to stand out incredibly obviously. So that's a little bit of a challenge, and what you really need to know then are your principal parts. Now remember that principal parts 4 give us the perfect active, and that principal part 5 gives us the perfect middle passive. And I'm saying perfect here, but this also includes the pluperfect because they're part of a system. So the thing to really remember here is fourth is going to be our perfect system actives, while our fifth principal part is going to be our perfect system middles and passives. All right, again, more preamble because now we can actually get down to business. So we have powo, this is our verb stem. We've got here in the pe what we call the reduplication, where we kind of stutter the first syllable, the first consonant of the verb. So pepow, and this is a mark of the perfect system. Perfect, both active and passive and pluperfect. So that's something that we're going to get used to seeing a lot of. But now here in the very back, or very front rather, we get a past indicative augment. This is a dead giveaway that we're dealing with the pluperfect here. Good. So is it active or passive? That's the next question. We know the verb powo, to stop. We know it's perfect, so to have stopped, and we know it's now pluperfect, to had stopped is kind of how we would want to translate it, but is it active or passive? So here we have to look at the endings. If you remember, the kappa is a marker of the active, but then do we have an epsilon iota ending within the active? Well, you would have to kind of learned your charts, and I understand that's hard as we're getting through everything in the text, but you would turn to page 214 and see, yes, the pluperfect active, first column on the far left, works just like this because our personal endings for the pluperfect are a, ace, and then a with a new movable, and then mn, ette, sorry that new didn't show up, and then finally esson. Again, that's a giveaway that we're in secondary sequence here. So that's perfect. That's everything we need to know. It's more than perfect. It's pluperfect, as it turns out. So we've identified this fully. It's pluperfect, active, third person singular. So what does that mean? Let's translate it again with she. So she had, and its active meaning, stopped. So again, remember that the pluperfect kind of assumes a different tense is going to be used for a past tense action. She had stopped when it started to rain. She had stopped when I was still smoking, or something like that. These would be ways of expressing that. So the pluperfect has an important role to play in languages. That's what we have here. All right, kekoluthai. What are we going to do here? Well, again, we see reduplication. We're getting so used to that. And we see the verb, again, kind of essential meaning towards the center, koluo. What does that mean? Well, it's it's to hinder, right? And then sthai is going to be, as we've learned, our middle passive ending. So this isn't just going to be to have hindered, but to have been hindered. And note that there's no augment, so we know it's not pluperfect, but there's also just no pluperfect infinitive to exist. Pluperfect, just like imperfects. Let me say pluperfect, imperfect, no infinitive. It doesn't come up. They do everything they need to with either a present for the imperfect or a perfect instead of the pluperfect infinitive. A language could have pluperfect and imperfect infinitives. Greek just doesn't happen to do that. So to have been hindered, that's our translation. Good. Next, tethaumakata. Kate. All right. Well, this has some tricks up its sleeve, but we're getting better at handling this. Thauma, we've seen this in thaumazo. So we're starting to realize that something like those zeta omega endings, that zeta is somewhat optional. That's just kind of marking the present tense. Thauma, it's not thaumazka, or thaumazkata. Thauma is the real heart of this verb. If you know more Greek, and you know that that's actually also a noun, meaning wonder, or marvel, or kind of a very impressive thing. So anyway, we can kind of guess, given the vocabulary we know, this is coming from thaumazo, to admire, to wonder at. Why do we have this kind of reduplication? Remember that when we have aspirated characters, aspirated consonants, such as these, we're going to get a dissimilation of aspirates in the reduplication. These are all pretty highbrow linguistic terms, but they're useful here. Theta becomes ta, chi or ki becomes kappa, and phi becomes pi or p. So here we have tethaumakata. That's exactly what we're expecting. This is our simple reduplication. Is there a past indicative augment? No. So we're looking here at the perfect system, and we can tell it's active because we got the kappa, and then we have also the active endings with the thematic vowel alpha. So what does this mean? It's perfect, active, and then what ending is that? We know that to be second person plural. We've gotten used to that at this point. So what we want to say is, y'all have admired. That's it. It's easy as that. These are long words. These are complex words with augments and reduplications and endings, but it's all stuff that we've seen before. This is not fundamentally new. Dedokenai. Well, hopefully at this point, these ni endings are kind of clear, and you're saying, that's an infinitive ending. And then we get here, dedok. What kind of form of the verb is that? Well, we've got reduplication. We've got a kind of kappa here, and then we've got our essential meaning of this. Do, this is related via Latin to donate. This is the verb to give, didomi, in its present. And note that there we had reduplication within neota, same with tithemi. Those were how we were doing a present tense verb of some of these me verbs, these athematic verbs. And note that when we're not in the present tense, we had a different vowel in that reduplication. We get an epsilon. So what tense is this? It can be a little bit confusing because you remember that the aorist form of didomi was edoka, I gave. But that doesn't explain the reduplication. That only gets us an epsilon, but that's a past indicative augment. That's not part of reduplication. Dedokenai, especially with this ending, because that's a perfect infinitive ending, is clearly going to be our perfect infinitive active of the verb to give. So, to have given. It is better to have given than to have received. Something like that would be a way that you could use dedokenai in Greek. Last but not least for this section, katalelutai. So what are we doing here? A number of things, again, to note. Hopefully you've gotten better at kind of recognizing some of these different parts of the verb. So let me go to a different color, kind of green. Kata. That's, of course, a prefix, a adverbial prefix, down or thoroughly. To kataluo is to kind of utterly destroy. Lel, well, we can see with this lu here, our favorite verb, luo, this is simply reduplication. So we're showing that this is perfect system. But what tense is it? We have a tie ending, which we should know is third person middle passive, but we should also know, as opposed to the ta ending, this is a primary ending. So that means we're definitely in the perfect rather than pluperfect. How else could we tell that? Well, the pluperfect will tend to have a augment. Well, would have an augment that would show up here. So we have all this. What happened to the kappa? We're used to seeing a kappa there, right? Well, remember that that's only for the active form. And we're talking middle passive here. That's dropped off. We're not working with the fourth principal part. We're working with the fifth principal part. Not active, because the kappa is active. All right. So let me erase all this mess and try to get back to what we were saying. So what have we decided? This is perfect, middle passive. Let's treat it as passive, because what we're really translating now is not luomai to ransom, but kata luo. If you were to look this up in the back of the text, you would see it means to destroy, or I destroy. So that's our verb that we're going to be working with, something about destroying. And now we need to put that in the middle, or sorry, rather the passive third person singular and perfect. So let's again make it she, or no, let's make it it, because let's say we're talking about a town. It has been, so has showing that we're in the perfect system here. Been, because we're showing that this is passive, we're going to use a form of the verb to be. It has been destroyed. That's what katalelutai means. So it could be he or she has been destroyed, but it has been destroyed is just a great way to translate this, katalelutai. Hope that was helpful. We'll see you as we move on. This chapter 31 seems never ending. It's got a lot of good information, but of course it's kind of potpourri at this point. But let's quickly review. Actually, I don't know if we really need to. Note that we've only had one example in all of these that has a past indicative augment. And that was this first one. And that's a clear sign when you've got past indicative plus reduplication that we're dealing with a pluperfect here. And remember that there's no pluperfect infinitives. That's something else to keep in mind. All right, great. See you in the next video. Until then.